Okay, here we go. Here we go. Let me just stop sharing that screen. Okay. And here we go. Get everything set. Okay. And can you see my screen? Sylvia, I can see you.
Yes.
Okay, lovely, lovely. Okay, here we go. Okay. Everyone, welcome. This is the Policy Leadership Academy, brought to you by Antelope Valley Best Start. We're so pleased that you could join us this morning. This is Module 5, so almost at the midway point, not quite, but almost. Module 5. I'm going to ask you to take a moment to please sign up. If you're in the chat and you said good morning or hello to everyone, that's great. We always love to hear from you, but also take a moment to sign up using the sign-in sheet, as that is our record that you're here, and we will be giving out certificates at the end of the cohort, at the end of the academy. So please take a moment to sign that. My colleague Stephanie put that in. And I'm also going to ask, we have our translators Carmen and Carlos here with us this morning. If you want to hear this presentation in Espanol, we have you covered. So I'm going to ask Carmen to give the instructions in Spanish.
Buenos días y bienvenidos a la reunión del día de hoy. Si gustan escuchar la interpretación en español y están en su laptop o computadora, bajito en su tablero van a mirar un símbolo de mundo que dice interpretación y allí mismo van a poder elegir su idioma de preferencia. Si están en un celular o una tableta, abajito en su teléfono en la esquina van a mirar 3 puntitos donde dicen more or más y allí mismo también van a poder elegir su idioma de preferencia. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Carmen. And as we move along, a little bit about the Policy Leadership Academy brings together stakeholders, community residents such as yourselves, to understand and address local, statewide, and federal issues through a shared knowledge of causes and impact, current problem-solving frameworks, and best practices and actions to address change with an emphasis on policy. Our timeline, we just went through, if you were with us, we just went through the month of February. Now we're going to go through the month of March. April, we'll have a couple sessions in April. We will be dark the second to the last, but that last meeting is an exciting meeting because we'll do a recap, and then we'll also have a survey for you to fill out so that you can share with us your experience. Today's agenda, we have our speaker, Danielle Johnson, followed by a Q&A. And so it is my pleasure. I'm going to turn it over to my director, Sylvia, but we are so pleased. If you have attended any of our diversity trainings, we've had 2 so far. Danielle Johnson is just a wonderful speaker and brings such a wealth of knowledge. Her company is Inclusive Growth Strategies. Today, she's going to be speaking on the subject of inclusion versus diversity. So a great topic, one that's so important. And so I'm going to turn it over to my director, Sylvia, to introduce our speaker for the morning.
Thank you, Tracy. Good morning, everybody. And we're super excited to have our friend Danielle Johnson with us. Danielle lives by a mantra: think, speak, and act for yourself and your community. Danielle is the executive director of Wichita Habitat for Humanity and majority owner of Inclusive Growth Strategies, a diversity, inclusion, and equity consulting business. She prides herself on being an affordable housing advocate, conversation catalyst, inclusion and diversity educator, a community mobilizer, and a super volunteer. Danielle is a product of USD 259 Public Schools, a 2-time Wichita State University shocker with a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in public administration. Danielle is no stranger to board, committee, and community service, as she currently serves on the following boards. She serves on the Community Operations Recovery Empowerment, Inc., Wichita Urban Professionals, Rise Up for Youth, Wichita Branch NAACP, Health Core Clinic, and Leadership Wichita. Danielle has taken courses with Advanced Kansas Kansas Leadership Center, Young Professionals of Wichita Leadership Academy, and Leadership Wichita. Danielle and her spouse, District 1 Councilman Brandon Johnson, are proud parents of 3 children, ages 17, 8, and 3. Danielle has extensive nonprofit community engagement experience, and Danielle sees the importance of representation and pushes to move the needle in the spaces she's in. Ultimately, what drives Danielle is her passion for our community as a whole, without ever forgetting that community is made up of individuals coming together. Again, please help me welcome Danielle to the Policy Leadership Academy.
Good morning, and thank you so much for that very warm introduction. I look forward to engaging with everyone. Very quickly though, can you all see my screen? I want to make sure that I'm sharing.
We can.
Awesome. Okay, well, we will get right on in. So my name is Danielle, and I am considered a conversation catalyst. For those that don't know what that term means, it affectionately comes from our organization right here in Wichita, Kansas, and that is our Kansas Leadership Center. And they really believe in the importance of leadership, and that leadership is an activity. So anyone can engage in leadership just based on that kind of definition of leadership and it being an activity. And as a catalyst, I'm looking at the DEI work as an event or person that causes great change. And so oftentimes in this space, we are looking to create great change in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So feel free to utilize that term in your own markets, in your own community as a catalyst, a conversation catalyst. How are you creating opportunities and change within your own communities? We're also going to have some discussion today. My hope is that in your one breakout, you all have a fruitful conversation, but as we engage with one another, I want to share these conversational expectations. You can utilize these as well as you continue the dialogue. It's important to understand that training alone doesn't change anything. It is what you do with the knowledge that you're embarking on throughout the workshops that you're attending, and how you utilize what you've learned and put them into practice. As a facilitator, I reserve the right to halt discussion and maintain order. I've been in a number of conversations where folks have been on the polar opposite side of a discussion, have been in what we like to call raising the heat. The heat was hot, right? But folks were still respectful. And that's one of the main things that we can do in this space, is remain present and be respectful in the space and the time we have today. Lean in. For us, I mean lean into discomfort. Oftentimes these topics can be uncomfortable. They may push our own value system, our own cultural understanding and upbringing. And so it's really important for us to lean into that discomfort, because in that place of discomfort is an opportunity for growth. Wait, why am I talking? Why am I not talking? For my more introverted folks that might need a little bit more time, I invite you to share your thoughts and ideas first. And our more extroverted folks, I ask that you wait for a moment. Sometime we can take up a little space, but I feel like we're an intimate of enough group that anyone that would like to share will be able to be heard today. One mic, one person speak at a time. Land the plane, which is one of my personal favorites. This is a learning environment, and so I want to make sure that we respect it and treat it as such. So please just ask your questions, say your statements. I'm not looking for political correctness in this space, but an opportunity to learn from one another and educate one another. While we are doing that, while we're speaking freely and candidly, we want to assume good intent, right? It's easy to label racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever the ism or obia is. We want to be open today and engaging and understanding each other's backgrounds and cultures in the conversation, while also understanding that freedom of speech is not freedom from consequences. You still may step in it, you still may offend. An apology goes a long way, and a willingness to change the behavior is important to add to that as well. Stories stay and lessons leave. I hope I learned from you all and you learn a little bit from me, but as we share our stories, that we make sure that we respect one another and respect each other's stories and share the principles and the essence of what we can learn from one another today. Again, please feel free to utilize these conversational expectations as you continue to do the work in your organizations and communities. I also want us to take just a moment to kind of clear our minds, get rooted and grounded in the space that we're in today. This is a great time for you to join me on the screen if you can, to be as present as possible. I know not everyone is in a place to be on camera, but if you can, that would be great, so we can be able to just kind of see each other's faces and body language. So I invite you to join me. I also invite you to close down any additional screens or things you got going on in the background, so that you're able to give your time and your whole self in this space. And as we move forward, I want you to consider or kind of be mindful of this following statement and look through this kind of lens as we go through our workshop today. Diversity is a fact. Inclusion is a choice. That comes from Timothy R. Clark. He has an article in Forbes, and he goes on to say, diversity benefits no one unless we can unleash its power. Simply putting diverse people together doesn't tap their creative potential. Inclusion does that. Inclusion releases talent and activates a cooperative system to harvest that talent. Without inclusion, we will stall, sputter, and break down. Yet many organizations declare victory after becoming more diverse. That's a premature and uncritical celebration. Becoming diverse is just the first step in a two-step transformation. So today we're going to be delving into diversity versus inclusion and how that shows up in our work, and how we can't just be diverse and lean on that space, because it's a fact. We're diverse all the time. We might be missing facets. I'll get into that a little bit later, but how do we actively work to go into inclusion? We're going to go into our first breakout room. You all will have about 6 minutes. I know that's brief, but just an opportunity for you all to engage with one another. And the questions you're going to answer are, do you have any apprehension about engaging in equity, diversity, and inclusion topics? An example, maybe you've offended someone, or maybe you don't feel like you're invited to that dialogue. And then secondly, please share the best advice you've received around engaging in equity, diversity, and inclusion. What's some good stuff that has been shared with you to be able to engage in this work, right? You all may already have some success stories that you might want to share. And then I would ask if you can identify one person that might come back and share. We might hear from one or two of you all when you come back in the room.
Oh, we're gone.
All right, welcome
Wow,
back, everyone.
that was too quick.
It is fast. It is fast. I'm sorry if you all were engaging in some really great conversation. I hope you all continue to engage as you move forward. I would love to hear from maybe one or two people. And really on that second question, please share the best advice you've received around engaging in EDI. So if there's someone that might want to share, what's some of the best advice you've received?
Honestly, I haven't yet. I'm here to learn.
Okay, you're gonna get it today, Wendy. You're leaning into today. Okay. Anyone else?
Something that came up in our breakout room, I think for a few of us, was to just ask if you're unsure, was really great advice that our kids have actually given us.
Yeah, that goes a long way, right? Appropriate questions, of course, but sometimes just asking versus assuming will take you where you need to go. Doing a little bit of research never hurt anybody, right? Okay, so thank you all for engaging in that very tight time frame. We're gonna move right along and go over some common language. I've said a couple of these things already. I want to root us in the same language as we move forward, or very similar definitions. There's some acronyms I've already thrown around. So you see IND, inclusion and diversity, D&I, diversity, inclusion. Sometimes you'll see the E in play, that's equity. We're starting to see the B pop up in these alphabet soup letterings, B standing for belonging. Belonging refers to human emotional need to feel secure and supported, a sense of acceptance and opportunity to affiliate with members of a group. Oftentimes belonging and inclusion are tied together when folks are doing this work. Systemic, you may see systemic come up, so relating to or affecting the whole of a system, organization, etc. Culture is systemic. Systems theory states that systems are interrelated, interconnected parts that create a whole. There are patterns of behavior deeply rooted in structural systems. And so oftentimes we're kind of fighting some of those structured systems as we're creating policy in spaces and places, because as you know, some of our laws were created in spaces and times where not everyone had equal rights or equitable rights, if you will. Intersectionality is an understanding that describes the ways that systems of inequality based on social identities, such as, or facets as I like to use, gender, race, ethnicity, social class, religion, what have you, how those things intersect and overlap. And oftentimes we see dynamics that affect one another. And that coined term comes from the scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. So if you're ever looking for more of her work, she has an amazing TED Talk that really breaks down intersectionality. So just some extra resources for your consideration and some incredible readings around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then equality and equity. And I'll actually just skip right on to this particular graphic. I'm sure you have seen equity and equality showcased in a number of ways. This is the one I prefer to look at, but equality, when we think about equality, everyone getting the same thing, the same level of treatment at the same time, right? Everyone given the same thing. And we see this in this picture where you see these three people. One is standing on a box, one is on their tiptoes, and the third person cannot use that box. Equality is being used here. Everyone's given the same thing. Equity, though, is showcased in this second picture where you see the first person doesn't need a box, no help is needed at all. They're standing on their own 2 feet. the second person needs 2 boxes and the third person needs a ramp so that they can engage at the same level as their counterparts. We would say that liberation or justice looks like there not being a barrier in the first place, so that anyone can actually engage with the game. And so just wanting to take some time to reflect, when you think about the work that you're engaged in or what you want to do, are you engaged in equality work or equity work? And sometimes our policies and practices dictate how we can show up in decision-making or creating choices. Sometimes we're forced into an equality situation. In my other hat, I work for Habitat for Humanity, and we do fair housing, and we have to follow those laws to ensure who we can serve and how we can serve them, right? So sometimes your policies and practices dictate where you can lean into equality or equity, but it's always important to engage in equity when you can, so that we're serving people at the level in which they can be met and served. So diversity, because this is diversity versus inclusion. What are we talking about here? Again, common language want to root us. The unique range of human differences, diversity facets, including but not limited to race, ethnicity, gender expression, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, socioeconomic, and some other facets. Again, this is not an all-encompassing list because diversity is a vast definition or term. That's why we always like to say diversity always exists. And when we go into diversity, we also want to back that up with data. So what's out there? There's no shortage of data. And I always say, if you're doing diversity work, ask yourself, what information are you collecting? Where is your data to back up the work that you're doing this? What are the policies, what are the practices? What's in your budget to state that you are working in diversity, equity, and inclusion? Companies with more than 30% women executives were more likely to outperform companies where the percentage ranged from 10 to 30. A 2019 McKinsey report on 533 public companies found that those in the top quartile for ethnic and racial diversity in management were 36 times more likely to have returns above their financial industry mean. Companies in top quartile for gender and ethnic diversity, where these things intersect, are 12% more likely to outperform all other companies in their data set. 60% improvement on decision-making abilities when you are working on a diverse team. And then research has found a strong homogenous culture stifles natural cognitive diversity. If you are feeling the pressure to conform to your team in ways that are distracting, right? Like if you feel like your hair, your tattoo, your facial piercing, you're the only one in the room in whatever diversity facet that looks like. Maybe you're the only racial minority, maybe you're the only out LGBTQ plus person, maybe you're the only open Christian, whatever that looks like. If that is on your mind, it is hard for you to do your job. So those facets, understanding those facets and those gaps are important. And if you're looking again for more research, McKinsey, the McKinsey report is pretty extensive and always stays up to date on some of the trends and the numbers in diversity, equity, and inclusion across businesses. To take it a step further, when we're thinking about the dimensions of diversity, and we see it here, when we think about ourselves in the middle, there's a number of things going on as we are doing this sort of work. And when you think about yourself internally, maybe you resonate or engage with those internal factors, which may look like your race, your age, your national origin, your ethnicity, your physical or mental ability. That next ring really kind of thinks about the external. So your educational level, or maybe lack thereof, or lack of access to education, your socioeconomic status, your geographic location, experiences, your family status, your citizenship. That next ring talks about your organizational placement. So are you union affiliated? What's your function in your work? Are you a management status? What's your title? Are you salaried? Are you tenured, right? All of those things can be the changing factors in your dimensions of diversity. And then other things that play a big role in how we see DEI is the era. When we think about the world events that have happened, think about COVID and where we are in that space, where some folks were working from home that had access while others did not have that opportunity, where young folks or kids were going to school online, but we realized that there were a lot of schools or areas that didn't have broadband or access, right? So thinking about your access and engagement when you think about diversity. So that's just kind of like an overview of where I'm coming from when we talk about diversity, but there's some other pieces that play into diversity work, and it's the law, right? I've heard folks say the spirit and the law of diversity, equity, inclusion. Well, what do we mean by that? There are some laws out there that dictate what you can and cannot do, or should and should not do. And a lot of that's rooted in the EEO, so equal employment opportunity. It's important to understand how those laws relate to diversity work in your field, in your organizations. There are some EEO requirements, right? These laws protect employees and job applicants against employment discrimination. And there are such things called protected classes. Those classes ranging from race, color, religion, sex, including pregnancy, those that can get pregnant, gender identity, sexual orientation, national origin, age, 40 or older, disability, or genetic information. Those are areas considered as protected classes. And EEO doesn't guarantee that those from those groups will get hired, but there should be a level of regulated protection there, right? That you will not face rejection or difficulties because you're from one of those protected classes. Now, do people still experience discrimination and are left out of opportunities because of that, be it housing, loans, credit, all of that? Absolutely. But there are some laws in place that are to help really kind of grow the diversity in the space. Be aware of your municipal laws. I'm from Wichita, Kansas. We do have non-discrimination ordinances on our books, and that kind of also plays into how folks can report if they feel like they've experienced discrimination on the job. You may have some things on your county books, your state laws. So how do those things show up in your space? And are you aware of what's kind of going on at the local level around equal opportunity and employment, and who you need to talk to for any protections that may exist? You have your EEOC also, which is your U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So again, another resource or place or space to look at opportunities to parallel some of your practices in your work. So respectful and inclusive workplace with equal employment opportunity for all is the vision. And the mission for the EEOC is prevent and remedy unlawful employment discrimination and advance equal opportunity for all in the workplace. You might also have human rights commission in your community that you can report to or get support or more information or resources from. And it's always important to know how to report in your organization, right? If you're noticing that there is pay discrimination happening in your workplace, you all are doing the same job, yet there's some change, there's a difference between your gender or age, and those are the factors that are keeping you from getting the same salary. That's something to engage with. That's something to report and understand, right? Because we want to be able to serve our organizations to the best of our ability. There's some other kind of case law if you're interested in looking into how organizations work around diversity and inclusion and equity work, and where some of those laws are rooted, be it Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, discrimination employment, Equal Opportunity Act, right? There's opportunities for you to kind of dig into those spaces or utilize those ways for additional resources. And demographics continue to shift, right? So many spaces are multi-generational and multicultural. Per McKinsey and Company, 3 out of 4 Gen Zers, so those that identify or were born between 1997 and 2013, are saying as consumers, they will boycott companies that discriminate against race. So we're starting to see folks be more vocal and take stances and say, I won't deal with your organization or your company if you're not standing for the values, if you're not standing for diversity, equity, and inclusion values. I'm seeing some questions in here. Let me do a quick look. How do we show it's difficult? How do we show it's difficult to do our job and we're the only one in the room without appearing incompetent? And how does one brace for the retaliation that will come in raising the organization's awareness level? Okay, I will circle back to some of these questions at the end because I think some of the inclusion pieces might answer those. If not, I will circle back. Just to take this time to reflect, a reflection moment. What does diversity look like in your organization? So just think about the places that you work, live, and play, particularly where you work though. What does diversity look like in that space? What are the facets that are missing? Who's not at that table? What would your organization look or feel like if those missing facets were represented? Is your organization prepared to have those facets represented? And are you prepared to have those facets represented? Oftentimes the work starts with self. When we talk about DEI, how are we showing up in the space? How are we working alongside our constituents, our colleagues? And then how are we uplifting diversity, equity, inclusion? Because it's not just the chief diversity officers, if you have one, or your diversity subcommittee, or your group of volunteer folks doing DEI work, but it is in fact the full organization's job to lean into that space if they so choose. So just want to take a moment for you to kind of reflect and check in on what I've shared around just diversity. Now I'm going to transition into the inclusion side of this presentation. And what do we mean by inclusion? The involvement and empowerment where the inherent worth and dignity of all people are recognized and valued. Jean, I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I just wanted to bring up a point I wanted to share. Say an example is Hispanic may include Indigenous, but
Mhm.
Indigenous is a separate social identity.
Mhm.
And a lot of times people can merge social identities together or cultures together that
Mhm.
really don't fit the same label or box or whatever you want to term it.
Okay.
And we need to be sensitive to that as well.
Right. Right. I mean, it's important to respect how people identify
Yes.
and understanding how to meet people where they are, as well as educate yourself on various cultures, right? Because we're not all just one thing. I'm half Black, half Filipino. I intersect in those spaces, but oftentimes I'm seen as maybe biracial or light-skinned woman, but I'm not necessarily seen as fully Asian. So it's important to respect the identity that I'm bringing to the table. And if I say I'm a Filipino woman, then see me as such, but don't treat me as a minority, but see my culture, celebrate my culture, but understand how to engage.
And then looking at the insider outsider dynamic.
Right. Right.
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you for that, Jean. Estella, and please correct me if I don't say names correctly.
No, you're good, Estella. Nice meeting you, everyone. For me, the inclusion, I think it's really important because when you're inclusive with everyone, you get to know the culture and value where they're coming from. It doesn't matter where you're coming from, what country or what culture, but just understanding that, we all have within ourselves that inclusion of understanding the value of the culture.
Mhm.
And sometimes we forget about that. And that's why we see a
Mhm.
lot of things around the world that are happening that are negatively being impacted because we're not understanding and thinking out of the box. Okay, this person perhaps is from Mexican background, but was born here, and you think that they speak Spanish. And what? They don't. And then
Right.
you're being stereotyped because that happens a lot. When you go to a supermarket, you speak to someone in Spanish and they tell you, I'm sorry, I don't speak Spanish. You're already diagnosing or thinking that person. And then oh, she's conceited. She doesn't want to speak the language. But that's not the way it works. We have to understand and value and be inclusive of everyone's background and the whys and why is that happening, right? So
Yeah. Thank you for that. Right. And that's a good point, is valuing a culture and understanding that cultures are not monolithic. Right. There can be consistencies, there can be things that are common, but that doesn't mean that everyone is having that same cultural experience. Thank you for that. Over the last 15 years, 92% of the population's growth in the United States has come from communities of color. So, right, these underrepresented groups are looking to see themselves in the worldview, in branding, in representation. And so how are our organizations, how are we showing up and paralleling how the numbers and the demographics are changing, and they are changing quickly. I know here in Kansas, we have communities that are predominantly Hispanic already. They are the majority. So even when we talk, when we use the language, I hear people say minority, majority. No, they're just a majority in that community. So how we engage with our growing communities and what that looks like, and how do opportunities also change? Because in those same communities, leadership has not changed. So there's a barrier. When you have a majority of a culture in a space working, living, and playing, but they're not showing up on city council, county commission, they're not populating in spaces to make decisions, we have an inclusion problem. Diversity exists, inclusion doesn't exist. So check your organizational culture and climate, right? How do you shape inclusion and belonging? As we reflect, do you feel included in your organization? Do your colleagues feel included? How often are you the only one in the room, be it by race, ethnicity, by language, by being the youngest, whatever those diversity facets are. And oftentimes that can create this imposter piece, right? Or it feels like the light is on you a lot more, but how do we overcome that? And how are we engaging and sharing our stories in those spaces? I often think that folks, when you're the only one in the space and you're always the one answering all the questions, that deserves more pay because you are the expert. You are the expert, right? While you are teaching your colleagues how to work with a certain culture, you are teaching your colleagues how to market to a certain place or space. That's a skill set that your other colleagues do not have. How are we embracing inclusion and moving the needle forward in honoring inclusion as well, right? Do you have leadership's buy-in? It's important to ensure that your board, your executive director, your CEO, whatever that leadership hierarchy looks like, what does that support look like? Because you may be the lone wolf in your organization pushing DEI, and you could get pushed out. I want to be critical when I share this, that you might be beating a drum that your organization is not ready for. And there are consequences to that. And I think we have to be honest about what our leadership looks like in this space. And are we willing to take on the time and the emotional burden that does come with DEI work when it's on your own or your organization is not ready for it, but you can prime the pump. Is there a need for an affinity business resource group, employee resource groups for connections, right? Is there a marginalized group of people looking to engage with others that are similar cultural background, right? When I was at Wichita State University, we had Black Student Union, Hispanic Student Leadership Organization, Spectrum LGBTQ+ and allies, pride group. So sometimes there is a need to bring folks together just so they can start at the connection level. Maybe there's no work being done, but just the opportunity to see others that are like them culturally to engage and build camaraderie. Other ways for us to shape inclusion looks like using first person language or person first language, maybe gender neutral language, because that's another way to build. No one wants to be defined by their traits. So when we think about people with disabilities, we're saying the people first, not a disabled person, right? Or maybe we're using gender neutral language and saying she and her and he and him, they and them. There's ways to have everyone feel included in our language, but it does take work. That's not going to just come to you overnight. It's intentional. How are we intentional with our language? Accessibility. How do folks have access to our programs, our organizations, our structures? So that might look like, your activities, environments, having sensible, meaningful, and usable spaces for people. And what does that mean? Well, down to our architecture, right? Consider people with disabilities, people that have situational disabilities, socioeconomic restrictions. Sometimes we keep people out because they can't afford to come. So we're looking at accessibility and inclusion and belonging and trying to streamline those things by asking ourselves some questions. So what do some of those action steps look like, right? Read the room, impact, counteract, set the expectation. And I always end with cultural humility because that's so important. What do I mean by read the room? Whose voices and experiences are being included or highlighted? Who do we always hear from? Are the people being impacted included in the decision-making process, right? Because there's the loud group that we always hear from, but where are the voices that don't always get amplified? And how do we engage with those perspectives, right? Diversity of thought is important too. We all can't have the same thought process. So how are we engaging there? Are there voices and perspectives being heard? Do they have power? Who has power in the room? Who's supposed to be at the table? Who can make the final decision? And what are the power dynamics at play in the decision-making process in addressing situations that are happening within your organization around diversity and inclusion? Whose cultural norms and values and standards and perspectives are reflected in the work, in processes and actions and decision-making? In that impact, how might this action, decision, service, or policy affect people with different social identities? People identify in different ways, but how are we engaging those in the work? Does this action increase a sense of belonging? Who is getting the resources? How are these resources being allocated? Who is the underrepresented or marginalized population? And are we serving them in the way that's accessible to them? Oftentimes I'll see organizations say, oh, we're gonna put this money in this space and we're gonna fund minority businesses, but they need to have this credit score and they need to, So you put something away with good intentions, but no one can actually access the dollars because we've not met with the group that we're creating the policy or the resource for. And we don't realize that there's an unintentional barrier. They can't get there because that credit score is not there, right? So are we looking at your ability to pay versus how do you qualify for these things? And how are we working with groups to be able to access? How might this action unintentionally advantage people from a dominant group and disadvantage people from underrepresented or marginalized groups? And what are some ways to ensure equitable impact or outcomes can actually be sustained? And we always have to counteract. We all grew up in a society where we learned stereotypes and biases and things that shape our values and our cultural norms. So we have to be really intentional about unlearning some things that we've learned, deconstruct and relearn, right? And what can you do in your spaces? Review your policies and procedures. When were they last updated? Are the policies still needed? Does someone need to have an Ivy League doctoral degree to work with you, or can you upskill them? Can you give people the training that they need to engage them in your organization or your workforce? Can you work with populations that don't normally get thought of to get them into livable wage jobs, right? We all have those types of opportunities, or creating resources for organizations to consider. Audit your hiring processes, right? From the application to the resume screening, in-person interviews, the assessments that are out there. What are the opportunities to diversify your workspace, but also ensure that folks feel like they belong and will be retained when they come to work alongside you or in your organizations? And then again, I can't underscore enough, pronouns, people first language, respect people and call them what they want to be called. When you're on the job, there are mission, vision, and values in your organization. And oftentimes uplifting those organizational values and living into them means engaging with your colleagues respectfully. Calling someone by their name is so important, by the name that they want you to call them, right? That goes a long way in belonging, not your personal values, but how do you engage respectfully with your constituent, your client, and the people that you work alongside? Setting the expectation, right? Of if you all have DEI values in your organization, that should be felt. We should know that this is an organization where I might not want to work here because I don't believe in DEI, because it's just that present and profound. Diversity and inclusion starts at recruitment efforts, and it's showcased in your retention, right? We'll see organizations say we value DEI, but when you look from the entry level to the very top of the organization, what does it look like? And you'll see who's able to move up in an organization just by virtue of who's in position and who's holding position. And are you all ready for the diversity that you're seeking? So a lot of pre-work goes into deciding whether or not your organization is ready to truly diversify and have an inclusive and belonging attitude. And so what does that pre-work look like? And what do you want to be reflective of? You can get simple census data. If you're looking for data, let's say you have nothing, look at your census and see who lives in your community. What are the numbers? How can you attract and retain those in your area? Sometimes your community foundations or organizations that are doing some large grant writing, they'll have some data and some numbers. So how are you engaging those communities to get them in your doors, be it as a client or a colleague? And what's the community for the diversity you are recruiting, right? You have to define what diversity looks like in your organization, because it exists, but what's there? And then how are we leaning into the belonging and the inclusion side? When we think about promotion, upward mobilities, opportunities, training, mentorship, matching, sometimes folks just need to be matched with someone that can help grow them in an organization. And while oftentimes I'm looking for folks in a higher space that look like me, I can also learn from anyone, right? So it's a both and. How are you engaging to get to that next space in your organization? And how are you mentoring others as well to get them in the door? Oftentimes the privilege of being the only one in the room is, do you have access to open the door so others can follow you? So it's not just you. And how are we bringing these things up in spaces? Cultural humility says a lifelong commitment to learning and critical self-reflection, desire to fix power imbalances with providers and client dynamics, and then institutional accountability. Respect and trust go a long way when we're thinking about organizations and the work that we're doing. So that was a little bit about diversity and inclusion, and I'm happy to just engage in any questions that you all have. And I want to go back to the ones that were in the chat from Wendy. But first, Wendy, do you feel like your question was answered, or do you want me to go back?
Oh, wow. What, ask the audience, because it's not, I mean, when I ask the question, I'm not just asking for me,
Okay.
so let's
Yeah.
check in and see if anyone else, because I can always go back and re-listen, because I was
Yeah.
typing when you were talking anyway.
No, you're good. So how do we show it's difficult to do our job when we're the only one in the room without appearing incompetent? And that's a great question, right? Oftentimes when you are the only one in the room, you're overcompensating because you don't want to appear incompetent, right? That whole we have to work twice, 3, 4, 5 times as hard kicks in for us. But I do think that I'll oftentimes ask questions like to my colleague, tell me about a time when you've been the only one in a space, or how often do you feel your identities in a space? Or have you ever felt like you were the spokesperson for your culture or your age group? And tell me more about that. And when we kind of dive into that dialogue, I often found folks are like, I've never considered it like that. Or have you ever been the only American in another country? What was that experience like? And then I parallel it back to I'm born and raised in Wichita, Kansas. So I spent my whole life oftentimes being the only woman of color or biracial person in the space, Black woman in the space, and sharing that candidly and openly in conversation when folks are willing to, they kind of, when they're more proximate to your story, they get it a little bit. It puts a heart to the story and not just oh, this person's always complaining, but they've never actually taken the time to engage in that conversation.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
So that hasn't happened to me personally, but in the field of work I've done in the past, I came across a lot of families and parents. They come from different places, right?
Mm-hmm.
Foreign countries, and they don't know how to express. They don't know. I'm sorry, I'm not going to say that. They don't feel comfortable expressing or wanting to ask questions and engage in conversations about what are their rights for their child's schools. So let's say a school setting. I worked LAUSD in charter schools as a parent liaison in the past. And I would see a lot of that. A lot of the families not being able to wanting to engage, although they wanted to, but they were afraid.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, we had your program in the San Fernando Valley at one time where they were providing classes for the families. And after the presenters would leave, which you guys did a beautiful job, or that group in the San Fernando Valley, but for some reason, families didn't want to ask questions because they were afraid. And these are families that, their second language is English. And, or maybe they're immigrants that they've been here such a short time. But not only that, from different places, Middle Eastern, Bangladesh, the Philippines, everywhere. And working with a very large group of multi-diversity group of parents, I've came across on that a lot. They feel intimidated until they understand how it rolls here, right? How they are not allowed, but they're, of course, you have a voice to opinion how you feel. So I worked a lot alongside with families to let them know it's okay. Nothing's going to happen to you. And this is people that they come from different, countries where, oh no, you can't say nothing. You have to be quiet. So this is a big ordeal, the impact, that personal impact, working with these families, how to motivate them, how to inspire them that, you're in a different country and it's different here.
Yeah. No, and that speaks specifically to inclusion and belonging, right? How we show up with the constituents that we're working alongside, and it behooves us to be educated on their culture, right? Because for some cultures, speaking up, not okay. And they didn't speak up at home. And now you're in the US where we really empower your voice, right? So it's both and. And that's where proximity is so important. And oftentimes when these families can see someone that can resonate with their background and their story, that helps to amplify their voice, right? I don't believe in the term giving the voice to the voiceless. You already have a voice. All I can do is amplify it or partner you with the right resource to amplify your voice. And that comes with education and really working side by side with the families or the groups or constituents that you're with. But that does take the education and helping folks to understand what empowerment looks like here and weighing out the opportunity cost, right? Because for some, speaking up can mean deportation. That's the other side. So we have to understand fully the consequences when and where and how one speaks up on the job or in your community. What are some of those consequences? Because they're real. So thank you for that. I would like to leave you with a personal impact statement. So just thinking about this session, how will this session inform your work in diversity and inclusion, right? Because while you might not be the CEO, or maybe you are, maybe you're the elected, or maybe you're not, you can do little things at the micro level that will support change at the macro level. So what can you do day to day to make those changes? And what are you committed to doing to impact change with what you've learned? And what are you going to do to succeed in that commitment? As you go through this whole policy presentation, what are the little things that you're going to add and tweak and change as you've had the opportunity to go through these workshops? When we listen and celebrate what is both common and different, we become wiser, more inclusive, and a better organization. So just thinking about what is our part in diversity and inclusion and not letting it get caught up in the very heavily politicized conversation now. It's important to know accurate history. It's important to educate yourself, understand the cultures that you're working alongside. That goes a long way in being able to create changes in your communities. And these slides will be available to you. I left us with about 5 minutes, Tracy, but I can still take any questions and stay a little bit after too, if need be. Thank you all for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to open it up now. I know we've had some engaging discussions in the chat. So if this is a moment you wanted to ask Danielle something, please take yourself off mute, put it in the chat. We can wait a couple seconds to see if anybody is typing away. So let me give it a couple seconds. Wendy in the chat, do you have space in your schedule to do more trainings this year? I'm really impressed with your expertise and delivery style. I'm still learning and I enjoy learning. Thank you. Danielle is our resident diversity. We actually have a diversity series going on right now. It's every other Friday. It actually started, when did it start? 2-3 weeks ago. And so I can certainly, we can certainly, you can email me and I can give you the list. There's still room if you wanted to join that, Wendy. And then, as to Danielle, we definitely love working with her and probably have, thoughts and ideas to have her come back at the latter part of the year. So absolutely. I think overall, the first session, we had about 650 people sign up for the one that was in 2022. So it was very well received. So absolutely. Any other comments, thoughts? Anybody wanted to say something? Take yourself off mute. I'll give it another couple seconds. And so I'm going to wrap it up. If I don't see anybody, I'd like to give either a virtual or an actual round of applause to our speaker today. Thank you so much. As I said, always love having Danielle here with us. I'm going to do just a little bit of housekeeping and then you're going to be free to go. So let me just start with my presentation. And can you see the presentation?
Yes,
Okay.
we can.
Thank you so much, Steph. So as I always, we do our after discussion on group site. So I know most of you are on there. We'll post a question after this about Danielle's presentation. So that's just a chance for you to interact and pull up any of the media that we have there, any of the pictures and any of the flyers, but also a chance to engage afterwards to continue the discussion. So if you're not on group site, let me know. We'll make sure you get on there, but that is our group site. Again, follow us on Linktree. This was brought to you by Best Start of Antelope Valley, the Policy Leadership Academy. So Best Start Antelope Valley, we have a Facebook, Instagram, we have our YouTube. All of the videos are posted. So again, would love to have you join us, like us, friend us, whatever, on our various different platforms. And so that is our Linktree. And I know my colleague Stephanie has probably already put it into the chat. She's on top of it. Next week, we're so excited. You may know this lady. This is Tavier Woolley. She will be talking about policy and action in your community. And when we say your community, it will be about the Antelope Valley. She's doing great things. She works in the homeless sector, has done some wonderful work. So that will be next Tuesday, March 14th. And again, you'll be getting that email week out, day out, an hour or so before. So you don't need to write anything down. You'll be seeing me in your inbox but that is Tavier. So we're super pleased to have her coming next week. Finally, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. I did want to say just to wind up, we did send out our bags full of the Policy Leadership Academy little goodies. You should have received a binder. You should have received some other goodies. If you have not, let us know. We are going to be at AVPH next Thursday for our regional meetings. And so I know here on the call, we've got Wendy, Christina, and who was the other one? Eduardo, was it Eduardo or and so I know the three of you, we did not connect with you. So if you're able to come to AVPH next Thursday, we're going to leave those bags there for you at the front. So let me know if that's going to be a possibility. And great, thank you so much, Christina. So we'll put those at the front for you. It'll have your name on them, and then you could just come and pick them up. And we probably get to AVPH about 9 o'clock in the morning for our regional meeting, and then we're there until 6. So any time of the day, if you want to come by, we'll make sure those are there. Again, thank you so much. We'll be seeing you next week for Tavier Woolley, and hope you're enjoying the Academy. And we'll see you again next Tuesday. Thank you so much, and take care.
Hi, Tracy.
Bye, Fran. Take care.
Okay, I finally got my package finished.
Okay, oh, good to hear. Good to hear.
All right. Talk to you soon. Have a great day, everybody. God bless you. God bless America.
You too, Fran. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Bye, Fran.
Yeah, good night, Darrell.
And I'm going
Good
to.
night. It's still good morning. What you talking
Okay,
about?
it's night somewhere. Okay.
Right, that's right.
It's nighttime, Fran. That's what
Just
it
like I say, it's 5:30 somewhere. So can we go have a little glass of wine? No.
Maybe.